Chapter 13, Generation of Abraham. Begin all acts and thinking by using Al-Kalum the All. Tablet 12, The Trial of David. 19 times 2 equals 38. Lo, the Ammonite idol Molech is really the Ammonite ruler, but everyone in his kingdom worshipped him. Molech had a golden crown that weighed about 75 pounds, and in it was a large jewel. David took it and put it in his own crown. Then he took a large amount of loot from the city, took people and put them to work with tools. Then him and his men returned to Jerusalem. As ruler of Israel, David ruled over his people with tyranny, which caused him to lose the respect of his people and caused him to be hung on a tree by his enemies with the help of his son Absalom. However, his officials took him and nurtured him back to health. After this event in David's life, he was redeemed and continued to rule in his kingdom until his old age, where then his officials sent him a young woman named Abishag from Shushan to take care of him until his death at the age of 100. Abishag was a young virgin from the town of Shushan, north of Zezreel and Mount Gilboa, in the territory of Issachar. She was extremely beautiful and was chosen by David's servants to become the nurse and companion of David during his final days. David was now 70 years of age, and the hardships of his eventful life had evidently left him greatly weakened, so that he had little body heat. Abishag waited on him during the day, doubtless brightening the surroundings with her youthful freshness and beauty. At shadow hour, she lay in David's bosom to give him warmth, but David himself had not had sexual intercourse with her. Nevertheless, the attitude later manifested by Solomon regarding her indicates that Abishag was viewed as being in a position of wife or concubine of David. As such, by ancient custom, she would become the property of David's heir at the time of his death. When David was crucified, and while hanging there he cried out, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, my El, why have you left me?" You see in this statement, according to Psalms degree 22:1, where David's crucifixion is described, and he is taken down off the cross alive, in relation to Matthew degree 27:46, where they claim Jesus made this same statement. David's downfall was due to his disobedience to El-Yahuwah. He disobeyed the commandment that was given to Abraham. The commandment was not to mix his seed with the daughters of the Canaanites. Once David passed away, his son Adonijah went to Bathsheba and asked her to inquire from Solomon if he, Adonijah, could marry Abishag. Solomon refused because he knew that Abishag knew David's ways, and if he allowed Adonijah to marry Abishag, he, Adonijah, would surely take the throne. However, little did Solomon know, by that time Abishag was already carrying Adonijah's child. Hence, Solomon had Adonijah killed so that he may no longer be a threat to him. Yet remember, David was a product of ancestral ancestors through Ruth to Moab, whose name means from my own father, son of Labna, the daughter of Lot, who fathered his own son. The same commandment was also given to Abraham's son Yitzhak. Esau, the son of Yitzhak, and his brother Jacob violated this commandment by marrying a Hittite woman named Judith, and was hated by El-Elo for this act. With all the wisdom and knowledge found in the blood seed of Abraham, which David was from, he violated the law and married a Hittite woman named Bathsheba, daughter of Eliam, who he had committed adultery with, and then sent her husband Uriah to the front of the battle to be killed. Bathsheba bore David a son named Solomon. Before Solomon was born to Bathsheba, she was pregnant, but the child did not survive. It was the will of El-Yahuwah because of the curse that was placed on them. For this act committed by David, he was cursed. Tablet 13, The Story of Solomon. 19 times 15 equals 285. Lo, after Solomon had paid the last honors to his father David, he was resting in a valley between Hebron and Jerusalem when suddenly he swooned away. The name Solomon came from the Latin word sol, meaning sun, Om, the Hindu name of a deity, and On, the sun deity of Heliopolis, Egypt. Solomon represents the Grand Master of the universe, called also the Most Excellent Grand Master, whose symbol is majestic, and all coming from whence came all life force, energy, and power. On reviving, there appeared to him 8 angelic beings Anunnaki, each of whom had immeasurable wings, a symbol of the host of crafts that was manned of every color and form, and thrice they bowed down to him. "Who are you?" demanded Solomon, while his eyes were yet half closed. They replied, "We are the Anunnaki, set over the 8 crafts." They taught him to give therefore by service, and with an overstanding heart to judge the people, and to discern between agreeable and disagreeable. For who is so able to judge this so great a people? They continued, Elionel, our creator and yours, sends us to swear fealty and to surrender to you the power over us and the 8 crafts which are at our command. According to your pleasure and designs, they shall either be tempestuous or gentle, and shall bow from that quarter to which you shall turn your back, and at your command they shall rise out of the earth to bear you up, and raise you above the loftiest mountains. The most exalted of the 8 Anunnaki then presented to him a jewel with an inscription, To Elionel belongs greatness and might. And he said, If you have need of us, raise this stone towards the skies, and we shall appear to serve you. And as soon as these Anunnaki had left him, there came 4 others, differing from each other in form and name. One of them resembled an immense man, the other an eagle, the third a lion, and the fourth a bull. We are the Yahwehans of all the creatures that are living in the earth and water, they said, bowing profoundly to Solomon, and appear before you at the command of our Adonai, to do fealty unto you. Dispose of us at your pleasure. We grant to you and to your friends all the good and the pleasant things which the Creator has endowed us, but use all the noxious that are in our power against your foes. The Anunnaki who represented the kingdom of birds then gave him a jewel with the inscription, All created things praised the Yahuwah, and said, By virtue of this stone, which you need us only raise above your head, you may call us at any moment, and impart to us your commands. Solomon did so instantly, and commanded him to bring a pair of every kind of animal that live in the water, the earth, the air, and to present them to him. The Anunnaki departed quick as lightning, and in the twinkling of an eye there was standing before him every imaginable creature, from the largest elephant down to the smallest worm, also all kind of fish and birds. Solomon caused each of them to describe its whole manner of life. He listened to their complaints and abolished many of their abuses, but he conversed longest with the birds, both on account of their delicious language, which he also knew as well as his own, also for their beautiful proverbs that are currently amongst them from the Egyptians. The song of the peacock translated into human language means, As you judge, so shall you be judged. The song of the shadow nightingale signifies, Contentment is the greatest happiness. The turtle dove sings, It were better for many a creature had it never been born. The hoopoe, He that shows no mercy shall not obtain any mercy. The bird Sayadak, Turn to Anu, O you sinners. The swallow, Do good, for you shall be rewarded hereafter. The pelican, Blessed be Anu, in the skies and the earth. The dove, All things pass away, Elionel alone is eternal. The catter, Whoever can keep silence goes through life most securely. The eagle, Let our life be ever so long, yet it must end in death. The raven, The further from Enoshites the pleasanter. The cock, Your thoughtless humans, remember your creator. Solomon chose the cock and the hoopoe for his constant attendance, the one on account of his monitory sentence, and the other insomuch as his eyes, piercing as they do through the earth as if it were crystal, enabled him during the travels of the ruler to point out the places where fountains of water were hid. So the water never failed Solomon, either to quench his thirst or to perform the prescribed ablutions before prayer. But after having stroked the heads of the doves, he commanded them to appoint unto their young the temple of which he was about to erect as their habitation. His temple was symbolic of the mansion of the sun. Solomon came to rule at age 21, and at age 20 he appointed Aholiab and Bezaleel to build the tabernacle, and Hiram, who was a friend of David, furnished Solomon with material and workers for building the temple also. Hiram was a builder, however he was not an Israelite. This pigeon pair had in the course of a few years increased so much through Solomon's blessed touch that all who visited the temple walked from the remotest quarter of the city under the shadow of their wings. When Solomon was again alone, there appeared to him an Anunnaki, whose upper part looked like the earth, and whose lower was like water. He bowed down towards the earth and said, I am created by Elionel to manifest his will, both on dry land and onto the sea. But he has placed me at your disposal, and you may command through me over earth and sea, and at your will the highest mountain shall disappear, and others rise out of the ground. Rivers and seas shall dry up, and fruitful countries shall be turned into seas or oceans. oceans. Then he presented to him, before he vanished, a jewel with the inscription, "The skies and the earth are the servants of Eli and Elionel." Finally, another Anunnaki brought him forth a jewel, which bore the inscription, "There is no Elo but one El Elo." "By means of this stone," said the Anunnaki, "you obtained the dominion over the kingdom of spirits, which is much greater than that of mortals and beasts, and fills up the whole space between earth and the skies. Part of these spirits," continued the Anunnaki, "believe in the only Anunnaki and pray to him, but others are disagreeable. Some adore the amber fire, others again the different stars, and many even the moon. The first continually hover around the pious to preserve them from the disagreeable and sin, but the latter seek in every possible manner to torment and to seduce them, which they do more easily since they render themselves invisible or assume any form they please. Solomon desired to see the jinn in their original form. The Anunnaki rushed like a column of fire through the air and soon returned with a host of reptilians and gargoyles, whose appalling appearance filled Solomon, in spite of his dominion over them, with an inward shudder. He had no idea that there were such mishap and frightful beings in the world. He saw human heads on the necks of horses and asses' feet, the wings of eagles on dromedaries' backs, and the horns of gazelles on the head of the peacock, and the skin of a snake on the face of a 7-foot man. Astonished at this singular union, he prayed to the Anunnaki to explain it to him, since Yaa-Nun, from whom all the jinn were descended, had only a simple form. "This is the consequence," replied the Anunnaki, "of their wicked lives and their shameless intercourse with mortals, beasts and birds, for their desires to know no bounds, and more they multiply, the more they degenerate." When Solomon returned home, he commanded the 4 jewels which the Anunnaki had given him to be set in a signet ring, in order that he might be able at any moment to rule over spirits and animals, and over wind and water. His first care was to subdue the reptilians and jinn. He caused them all to come before him, save the mighty Shakar, who kept himself concealed in an unknown island of the ocean, and Iblis, the master of all evil spirits, to whom El Elo had promised the most perfect independence till the day of judgment. When they were assembled, he stamped his signet ring on each of their necks to mark them as his slaves. He obliged the male jinn to erect various public buildings, among others also a temple after the plan of the Kaaba in Mecca, which he had once seen during his travels to Arabia. The female jinn he obliged to cook and bake, to wash, to weave and to spin, to carry water and to perform other domestic labours. The stuffs that they produced Solomon distributed amongst the poor, and the food which they prepared was placed on the tablets 2 leagues square, for the daily consumption amounted to 30,000 oxen and as many sheep, and with a great number of fowls and fish, of which he could obtain as many as he chose by virtue of his ring, notwithstanding his remoteness from the ocean. Yeshua later wore this same ring to control the fish. The jinn and the reptilians sat at iron tables, the poor at tables of wood, the chiefs of the people and the army at tables of silver, but the learned and eminently pious at golden ones, and the latter were waited on by Solomon himself. One day, when all the spirits, men, beasts and birds had risen, satisfied from their various tables, Solomon prayed to Eli and Elionel that he might permit him to entertain all the creatures of the earth. "You demand an impossibility," replied the head Anunnaki, "but make a beginning tomorrow with the inhabitants of the sea." Solomon thereupon commanded the jinn to load with corn 100,000 camels and as many mules, and to lead them to the seashore. He himself followed and cried, "Come hither, you inhabitants of the sea, that I may satisfy your hunger." Then came all kinds of fish to the surface of the sea. Solomon flung corn unto them till they were satisfied, and dived down again. On a sudden, a whale protruded his head, resembling a mighty mountain. Solomon made his flying spirits to pour one sack of corn after the other into its jaws, but it continued its demand for more, until not one single grain was left. Then it bellowed aloud, "Feed me, Solomon, for I have never suffered so much hunger as today." Solomon inquired of it whether there were more fish of its kind in the sea. "There are of my species alone," replied the whale, 70,000 kinds, the least of which is so large that you would appear in its body like a grain of sand in the wilderness. Solomon threw himself on the ground and began to weep, and besought Yahuwah to pardon his senseless demand. "My kingdom," said Eli and Elionel to him, "is still greater than yours. Arise, and behold one of those creatures whose rule I cannot confine to man." Then the sea began to rage and to storm, as if all the 8 winds had set in motion at once, and there arose up a sea monster so huge that it could have easily swallowed 70,000 like the first, which Solomon was not able to satisfy, and cried with a loud voice like the most terrible thunder, "Praise be Eli and Elionel, who alone has the power to save me from starvation." When Solomon was returning again to Jerusalem, he heard such a noise proceeding from the constant hammering of the jinn, who were occupied with the building of the temple, that the inhabitants of Jerusalem were no longer able to converse with each other. He therefore commanded the spirits to suspend their labours, and inquired whether none of them was acquainted with the means by which the various metals might be wrought without producing such a clamour. Then there stepped out one from among them, and he said, "This is known only to the mighty Shakar, but he has hitherto succeeded in escaping from your dominion." Shakar replied, "The genius is stronger than all of us put together, and is as much as our superior in swiftness as in power. Still, I know that he drinks from a fountain in the province of Hijr once every month. Perhaps you may succeed, O wise ruler, to subdue him there to your scepter." Solomon commanded forthwith a division of his swift-flying jinn to empty the fountain and to fill it with intoxicating liquor. Some of them he then ordered to linger in its vicinity until they should see Shakar approaching, and then instantly to return and bring the word. After a few weeks, when Solomon was standing in the terrace of his palace, he beheld the genius flying from the direction of Hijr, swifter than the wind. The ruler inquired of him if he brought the news respecting Shakar. "Shakar is lying overcome with the wine at the brink of the fountain," replied the genius, "and we have bound him with chains as massive as the two front pillars, Joachim and Boaz, of your temple." These pillars were symbolically supported also by three principal columns, Gomer equaling wisdom, Oz equaling strength, and Debor equaling beauty. But he will burst them asunder as the hair of a virgin when he has slept off his wine. Solomon then mounted hastily to the winged genius, and in less than an hour he was brought to the fountain. It was high time, for Shakar had already opened his eyes again, but his hands and feet were still chained, so that Solomon set the signet on his neck without any hindrance. Shakar uttered such a cry of woe that the earth quaked, but Solomon said to him, "Fear not, mighty genius, I will restore you to liberty, as soon as you shall indicate the means whereby I may work hardest metals without noise." "I myself know of such means," replied Shakar, "but the raven is best able to advise you. Take only the eggs from the raven's nest, and cover them with a crystal bowl, and you shall see how the mother bird shall cut through." Solomon followed Shakar's advice. A raven came and flew about the bowl, but finding that she could not get access to the egg, she flew away, and a few hours after it reappeared with a stone in her beak, called Samis, or Samer, or Shemar, which had no sooner touched the bowl than it fell in two halves. "Whence have you this Shemar stone?" inquired Solomon of the raven. "From the mountain in the distant west," replied the raven. Solomon then commanded some of the jinns to follow the raven to the mountain, and to procure more of these stones, but Shakar he set free again, according to his promise. When the chains were taken from him, he shouted with such exultation, but his joy sounded in Solomon's ear like the laughter of scorn. As soon as the spirits returned the stones to be carried back to Jerusalem, one of them divided the stones amongst the jinn, who could now continue their labours without the sound of a hammer or sweat of a brow, making the slightest noise. It is also said that Moses engraved the names of the 12 tribes of Israel on the stones of the breastplate by means of the blood of the worm Shammah, whose solvent power was so great that it could corrode the hardest substances. Solomon then had Hiram construct a palace for himself with a profusion of gold, silver, and precious stones, like that of which no ruler had ever possessed before him. Many of its all had crystal floors and ceilings, and he erected a throne of sandalwood, covered with gold and embossed with the most costly jewels. While the building of his palace was in progress, he made a journey to the ancient city of Damascus, whose environs are reckoned amongst the 4 earthly paradises. The genius on whom he rode pursued the straightest course and flew over the valley of Ants, which is surrounded by such lofty cliffs and deep impassable ravines that no man had been able to enter it before. Solomon was much astonished to see beneath him the host of ants, which were as large as wolves, and which, owing to their great eyes and feet, appeared at a distance like a cloud. But on the other hand, the queen of ants, which had never seen a human being, was in no small trouble on perceiving the ruler, and cried to her subjects, "Retire quickly to your caverns." But Yahuwah said to her, "Assemble all your vessels, and do homage to Solomon, who is ruler of the whole creation." Solomon, to whom the winds had wafted these words, then at a distance of 6 leagues descended to the queen, and in a short time the whole valley was covered with ants, in as far as his eye could reach. Solomon then asked the queen, who was standing at their head, "Why fearest you me, since your hosts are so numerous that they could lay waste to the whole earth?" "I fear none but Elian Elionel, replied the queen, for if my subjects, which you now beholdest, were threatened with danger, 70 times their number would appear at a single nod from me. Why then didst you command your ants to retire while I was passing above you? Because I have fear lest they might look after you, and thus forget their creator for a moment. Is there any favour that I may show you before I depart? Inquired Solomon. None that I know of, but rather let me advise you, as so to live that you mayest not be ashamed of your name, which signifies the immaculate. Beware also of giving away your ring without first saying, in the name of Elionel, the Yielder, the Merciful. Solomon once more exclaimed, Yahuwah, your kingdom is greater than mine, and took leave of the queen of ants. On his return, he commanded the genius to fly in another direction, as so not to disturb the deviations of the queen and her subjects. On arriving at the frontiers of Palestine, he heard now someone praying, My Elionel, who have chosen Abraham as your friend, redeem me soon from this woeful existence. Solomon descended to him, and beheld an aged man bowed down with years, and trembling in all his limbs. Who are you? I am an Israelite of the tribe of Judah. How old are you? Elionel alone knows. I counted up to my 300th year, and since that time a full 50 to 60 more must have passed away. How did you come to such a great age, which, since Abraham's time, no human being has attained more than 120? I once saw a shooting star in the shadow hour of El-Qadir, and expressed a senseless wish that I may meet with the wisest prophet before I died. You have now reached the goal of your expectations. Prepare thyself to die, for I am that prophet Solomon, to whom Elionel has granted a power such as no mortal before me has possessed. Scarcely had he finished these words when the Anunnaki of death descended in human form and took the soul of the aged man. You must have been quite close to me since you came so promptly, said Solomon to the Anunnaki. How great is your mistake! Be it known to you, O ruler, that I stand on the shoulders of an Anunnaki, whose head reached 10,000 years beyond the seventh heaven, and whose feet are 500 years below the earth, and who, withal, is so powerful that if Elionel permitted it, he could swallow the earth and all it contains without the slightest effort. He it is who points out to me when, where, and how I must take the soul. His gaze is fixed on the tree Sidra al-Muntaha, which bears as many leaves inscribed on the names as there are men living on the earth. At each birth of a new leaf is bearing the name of the newborn bursts forth, and when anyone has reached the end of his life, his leaf withers and falls off, and at that same instant I am with him to receive his soul. How do you proceed in this matter, and whither takest you the souls at death? As often as a believer dies, Nusku attends me, and wraps his soul in a green silken sheet, and then breathes it into a green bird, which feeds in paradise until the day of resurrection. But the soul of a sinner I take alone, and having wrapped it in a coarse pitch-covered woolen cloth, carry it to the gates of hell, where it wanders amongst the abominable vapours until the last day. Solomon thanked the Anunnaki for his information, and besought him, when he should one day come to take his soul, to conceal his death from all men and spirits. He then washed the body of the deceased and buried him, and having prayed for his soul, begged for the mitigation of his bodily pains at the trial he was to undergo before the Anunnaki Minka and Naka. The journey had fatigued Solomon so much that he ordered the jinn, on his return to Jerusalem, to weave strong silken carpets, which might contain him and his followers, together with all the requisite utensils and equipages for travelling. Whenever he desired thereafter to make a journey, he caused one of these carpets of a larger or smaller size, according to the number of his attendants, to be spread out before the city. And as soon as all that he required was placed upon it, he gave a signal to the 8 winds to raise it up. He then seated himself on his throne, and guided them into whatever direction he pleased, even as a man guides his horse with bitten reins. One shadow hour, Abraham appeared to him in a dream and said, Elionel has distinguished you above other men by your wisdom and power. He has subjected to your rule the jinn, who is erecting a temple at your command, the like of which the earth has never borne before, and you ride on the winds, as I once rode on Burak, who shall dwell in paradise until the birth of Malachi. Show thyself grateful, therefore, unto the only Creator, and take advantage of the ease with which you can travel from place to place. Visit the cities of Yathrib, where the last of the prophets, yet not the last of the apostles, last prophet of Ishmael, yet not the last to prophesy things that must come, shall one day find shelter and protection, and of Mecca, the place of his birth, where now the holy temple stands, which I and my son Ishmael rebuilt after the flood. The next morning, Solomon proclaimed that he would undertake a pilgrimage to Mecca, and that each and every Israelite that would be permitted to accompany him. There immediately applied so many pilgrims that Solomon was obliged to have a new carpet woven by the spirits, 2 leagues in length and 2 in breadth. The empty space which remained he filled with camels, oxen and smaller cattle, which he designated to sacrifice at Mecca for food and to divide amongst the poor. For himself he had a throne erected, which was so studded with brilliant jewels that no one could raise his eyes to him. The men of distinguished piety occupied golden seats near the throne, the learned were seated on silver, and part of the common people on wood. The jinn and demons were commanded to fly before him, for he trusted them so little that he desired to have them constantly in his gaze, and therefore always drank out of crystal cups as to never lose sight of them, even when he was compelled to satisfy his thirst. But the birds he directed to fly above the carpet in close array to protect the travellers from the sun. When the arrangements were completed, the men, spirit birds and beasts were assembled. He commanded the 8 winds to raise up the carpet with all it contained and to carry it into Medina. In the vicinity of that city, he made a signal to the birds to lower their wings, whereupon the winds gradually abated until the carpet rested on the earth. But no one was permitted to leave the carpet, for Medina was then inhabited by worshippers of idols, with whom the ruler would not suffer his subjects to come in contact. After a stay of 3 days, the ruler Solomon resolved to return again to Jerusalem. But when the birds had unfolded their wings, the carpet was already in motion. He suddenly discovered a ray of light striking upon it, whence he concluded that one of his birds had left this post. He therefore summoned the eagle and directed him to call over the names of all the birds and to report which one was absent. The eagle obeyed and soon came back with the answer that the hoopoe was wanting. Solomon grew enraged, the more so because he needed the hoopoe during the journey, since no other bird possesses powers to decry the hidden fountains of the desert. Soar aloft, he cried harshly to the eagle, search for the hoopoe and bring it hither, that I may pluck off its feathers and expose it naked to the scorching sun until the worms have consumed it. The eagle soared heavenward until the earth beneath him appeared like an inverted bowl. He then halted and looked in every direction to discover the truant subject. As soon as he spied it coming from the south, he plunged down and would have seized it in his talons, but the hoopoe adjured him by Solomon to forbear. "Darest you invoke the ruler's protection?" replied the eagle. "Well, may your mother weep for you. The ruler is enraged, for he has discovered your absence and swore to punish it terribly." "Lead me to him," rejoined the other. "I know he will excuse my absence when he hears where I have been and what I have to report of my excursion." The eagle led him to the ruler, who was sitting on his judgment throne with wrathful countenance, and instantly drew the delinquent violently towards him. The hoopoe trembled in every limb and hung down his plumage in token of submission. But when Solomon would have grasped him still more tightly, he cried, "Remember, O prophet, that you too shall one day give an account unto the Adonai. Let me therefore not be condemned unheard. How can you excuse your absenting thyself without my permission? I bring information respecting a country and a queen whose names you have not even heard, of the country of Saba, and Queen Sheba, who is called in tones Makeda, and in rhythm Bilqis. These names are indeed quite strange to me. Who has informed you of them?" "A hoopoe from those regions, who I met during one of my short excursions. In the course of our conversation, I spoke to him of you and your extensive dominions, and he was astonished that your fame should not have yet reached his home. He entreated me, therefore, to accompany him there, and I convinced myself that it would be worth your while to subject the land of Saba unto your scepter." On our way, he related to me the whole history of that country, down to its present queen, who rules ever so large an army that she requires 12,000 captains to command it. Solomon relinquished his hold of the hoopoe and commanded him to recount all that he had heard of this country and its history, whereupon the bird began as follows: "Most mighty ruler and prophet, be it known to you that Saba is the capital of an extensive country to the south of Arabia. It is Kush. Saba was the largest and most superb city ever constructed by the hand of man, and at the same time so strongly fortified that it might have defied the united armies of the world. But that which especially distinguished this city of marble places were the magnificent gardens in the center of which it stood, for the ruler Saba had, in compliance with the counsel of the wise Lugman, constructed vast dikes and numerous canals, both to guard the people from inundation during the rainy season and also against the want of water in times of drought. The first precursors of an approaching disaster sowed themselves in the reign of the ruler Amru. In his time, it was that the priestess Darifa beheld in a dream a vast dark cloud, which bursting amid terrific thunderings, poured destruction upon the land. She told her dream to the ruler and made no secret of her fears respecting the welfare of his empire, but the ruler in his countries endeavored to silence her and continued as before their heedless, careless courses. One day, however, while Amru was in a grove in dalliance with two maidens, the priestess stepped before him with disheveled cloth and ruffled countenance, and predicted a new speedy desolation of the country. The ruler dismissed his companions, and having seated the priestess beside him, inquired of her what new omen foretold this evil. The last ruler of Saba, named Sharabil, was a monster of tyranny. He had an advisor, descended from the ancient royal house of the Himyarites, who was so handsome, with his black eyes, thick hair, dark brown skin and milky white teeth, that he found favour in the eyes of the daughters of the jinn, and they often placed themselves in his way in the shape of gazelles, merely to gaze upon him. One of them, whose name was Umiria, felt so ardent an attachment for the visor that she completely forgot the distinction between good men and jinn.